Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts Life and Happiness Podcast, the show that takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible.
Good afternoon from Baltimore. Welcome to the Life and Happiness Podcast, sponsored by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm Jeffrey Nolt. I'm your host. Thanks for being here today with me. It's a pleasure, it's an honor, and I respect greatly our time together. We begin, as we usually do, with our Life and Happiness quotes of the day. Number 1, the famous poet Robert Frost once wrote, and probably said many times, quote, "The best way out is always through," end quote. Number 2, our decades-long radio host Bernard Meltzer is given credit for, quote, "When you forgive, you in no way change the past, but you sure do change the future," end quote. And last but not least, Russian writer Leo Tolstoy penned, quote, "Happiness is only in loving," end quote. Keep those in mind as we head into and through segment 1. On Good Friday, this past Good Friday, my husband John and I, got in the car and we started our trek to Kansas City via Nashville. We were headed to Kansas City because he is a travel nurse and his next month or 13-week gig is in Kansas City. He is doing this for our family and for various reasons that I won't go into now. But it is a good opportunity for him to make some very good money and to see different places and work with different people and meet different people. And as husband and husband, we have determined that it is fine for us to do this again. We'll see how long it lasts, but for right now, it's good for him and it's good for us. I'm on board. Anyway, on Good Friday, we headed to Kansas City via Nashville. Now, why Nashville? John suggested that we stop in Nashville because I have 2 cousins and my Aunt Sandy there. I am still sort of silly in the mindset of, well, they're there and I'm here and that's how that goes. But Nashville is west in the general direction of Kansas City. So John winningly and warmingly said, let's stop and see your cousins and aunt. And it was a great idea. The reason it was a great idea is I hadn't seen them for 15 years. And part of that is, as I said, the mindset of, well, they're there and I'm here on the East Coast and that's that. But it's also because I had some very little resentments. When my mom was ill 25, 26 years ago, I wished that they had seen her more in that time of illness. I was making a judgment. I was thinking about her. She loved these kids and her sister. She gave a lot of herself to them growing up because they had an alcoholic dad. And my aunt is very different from my mom. Wonderful, just different. So my mom gave a lot to them emotionally and some financially, but she just was a giver. So I was of the opinion that I wished that they had come to see her while she was dying. Ginny, my one cousin, her one answer to me was, well, we're praying for her. And was in a different place then than I am now spiritually, and I didn't quite understand that. I thought, for my mom's sake, actions would speak louder than words. The act of praying, however, is very important to them, and it always has been, and their faith. I just, being less spiritual then, thought, come and see her. She needs to see you in her final days. So I had some resentment over that. But that's been long gone, the resentments, really. And I've come to appreciate that family and forgiveness and loving family is a happier way to conduct yourself. At least it is for me. So off to Nashville we drove 10 hours. Getting around D.C. was challenging. Traffic and construction and traffic because of construction, etc. But we eventually headed west through Virginia and into Tennessee, and Virginia was a long way down to Roanoke, and then you keep going, and then you make that kind of right-hand turn into Tennessee. And so what we appreciated was the lushness of our country, and a lot of it, because it's springtime and had rained a good bit, was just so green. And the Good Friday was a beautiful day, so it was really a wonderful day to travel. And we enjoyed ourselves. We didn't get crazy with pushing it. We just knew it was 10 hours, and we wanted to stop at some antique places, and we did a few and had a few meals, and it was just a nice visit. So we got into Nashville late in the evening on Friday. We had arranged to meet Chris, my cousin Christine Dente, the next morning, Saturday. Chris and her husband Scott had moved to Nashville because they were recording artists, Christian pop recording artists, and had done very well. And they moved to Nashville to be, of course, near the music scene. It's an incredible music scene there. Then my cousin Ginny and her husband Sergio had been living in upstate New York, but it was really expensive and hard to manage up there. So they picked up and moved their 7 kids to Nashville to be closer to Chris and Scott and her kids and their kids. And then my Aunt Sandy just chose to go with them and live on their property with them. And it's a good situation for all. It was emotional. I was very glad to see my cousins. I realized that we're more alike than we are different. And there's a lot of love. There always has been. And I admire them. I admire their faith. I admire their talents. I admire their decisions as parents. I admire the kids that they have produced and reared. I really do. I don't know a lot of them at all, but this was a chance to meet a couple of them. Chris, we met at a coffee shop. She was concerned because she has a grandchild that's got some health issues, and she was concerned with respect to COVID. So we met at a coffee shop and just had a great visit. I just felt from her a great vulnerability and a great sensitivity and a great appreciation for life is. It is what it is. And I sensed that her faith is more about questioning, and I think she said to me, I know less than I ever felt like I've ever known. She was very good about asking about our lives. She's always been very inquisitive and very sincere and loving that way. And she was really happy to meet John, and he was very happy to meet her. And it just went really well. I love my cousins. Then we got in the car and jumped in the car and drove another hour south of Nashville to where my cousin Ginny and her husband Sergio have 29 acres and a nice home on that 29 acres. And it suits them. It really does. My cousin Ginny, as Chris explained, is someone who seems to think she knows more and more about the answers or the questions of the world. And so they're very different in that way. Neither one is right, neither one is wrong. That just was her comment to me. Ginny and Sergio have homeschooled their 7 kids. We met 5 of them were in the home. Their youngest is a young little boy, and their oldest is almost 30, and or almost mid-30s, I guess. And they've done a great job, and their choices have been their choices, and I just admire them all. And it was really fun to be among them and to see their home and to hear about what they've done, and for their kids to be so interested in John and me and just very present when they were. In fact, they all came out to meet us when we arrived, and they all came out of the house to greet us, and it was just very warm. And my cousin Ginny and I got a little teary, as I did with Chris earlier that morning, and just realized that we just hadn't seen each other in a very long time, too long. And we always have the capacity to make things better and to make changes in our lives. And then there's my Aunt Sandy. My Aunt Sandy is my mom's surviving sister. And that's an important connection that I can still have while Aunt Sandy is living. She's 83. She's doing pretty well. And she's just a kind, good-hearted lady. She was different from my mom. My mom was more inquisitive and always knew what she thought and had opinions and didn't mind a good civil argument. And my Aunt Sandy sometimes doesn't know how she feels, and she admits that, and that doesn't bother her. She's just a different kind of woman and lady. But she was a good mom, and she's a lovely lady. And so it was very touching to be with her and to listen to her and just look at her and see my mom in some ways and to appreciate the connection that I still have and that I can still nurture in the years to come. And I will. It's important to me. So Nashville was really helpful in the sense that I could exercise just a little forgiveness over something that just it shouldn't have become the issue for me that it did. But I was again being mindful of what was important to my mom. And my mom never said that she was disappointed in them or that anything like that. It was me projecting onto the situation my feelings. So I've learned a lot. I also was reading the book Everybody Needs to Forgive Somebody by Alan Hunt. And there was a portion of that about there's got to be a better way. And it was about Bud Welch, the father of Julie Marie Welch, who worked in the Social Security Administration in Oklahoma City. You probably know where this is going. She translated for clients who struggled with English, and her office was on the first floor of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. And she, on this particular morning, had gone out to receive a client and was walking back in the hallway when Timothy McVeigh detonated the bomb that killed her and 167 other people. His bombing of the building, the federal building, was against the U.S. government's. It was revenge for the oppressive actions he felt the U.S. government took by torching the compound that David Koresh and the Branch Davidians lived in Waco, Texas. So Bud Welch, her father, struggled with addictions and intense anger and did not know what to do with his pain. And he eventually, instead of wanting Timothy McVeigh killed, wanted him to be imprisoned for the rest of his life. And eventually he got to the point where he faced his addictions and what was inside him due to the death of his daughter, and eventually was giving inspirational talks. And Bill McVeigh, Tim's dad, extended an invitation to meet. He wanted to meet Bud Welch. So Bud went to where Bill lives, and eventually Tim's sister Jennifer joined them in the discussion. They talked and walked in the garden at Bill McVeigh's house, and they came to an understanding because each had lost a child. Bud Welch's daughter Julie, and Bill McVeigh's son Timothy. So, who's in prison So there's a commonality there, and that the whole premise was of forgiveness. Bud Welch realized that he had to forgive Timothy McVeigh, and how he could do that was getting closer to Tim McVeigh's dad, Bill, and his sister, Jennifer, and understanding their loss in the situation. Tremendous loss on both sides. And the commonality was one of Bud being able to forgive. And then was able to do justice to Julie in his life and could conduct himself in a much more positive and helpful way. Very inspiring story. Please stay tuned to segment 2, where I talk about our trip to Kansas City as we left Nashville. And coming up in segment 4 always is You Know Who You Are and Jeff's Daily Happy List. Be right back.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America's Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the Life and Happiness Podcast. This is Jeffrey Nolt here on the GSMC Podcast Network. In segment 1, I recounted John's and my trip to Kansas City via Nashville and how I was able to, upon John's suggestion of stopping through Nashville to see my 2 cousins and my Aunt Sandy, the surviving sister of my mom, the only sibling my mom had, was a wonderful idea. And I recounted how I sort of had the mentality of, well, they live there and I live here and the two shall not mix, and just based on logistics. And yet you can jump in a car, you can jump on a plane, and you can make that connection happen. I also recounted how I had some minor resentments about how they acted when my mom was dying, and I wish that they had been more present, physically present. And that is something that I had really forgiven them about and worked through with my own work in my recovery programs. And so I learned that we can be empathetic and we can be accepting of how somebody handles something, even if we don't approve of it. And what is my side of the street? And that's really what I should be concerned about. So I was able to put that stuff behind me, and then John suggested we stop, and it was a wonderful, wonderful thing. So I ask you folks out there, based on recounting that, my reconnection with my cousins and my aunt. I also have a cousin who lives in Atlanta, David, from the same family. Is there anyone toward whom you have a resentment? Is there anyone at whom you are angry to this day and is unresolved? And is there anyone from whom you feel estranged that you could really make the effort to reconnect with? It's empowering. And even if you're not resentful or angry, just who have you not seen in a while? Who do you think of and think, wow, I could go visit them. I really can go and visit someone and make the effort, show the action. So Nashville was really great that way. I also recounted the story in segment 1 of Bud Welch, who was the dad of Julie Welch, who died in the Oklahoma bombing at the hands of Timothy McVeigh, and Timothy McVeigh's dad, Bill McVeigh, who eventually was able to meet Bud Welch, and they were able to recount each other's personal agony at losing a child in the ways that they did. Timothy McVeigh, I believe, is in prison for life and should be, in my opinion. But they both were able to reconcile their own grief at losing a child. So pretty powerful stuff. But I ask you to look into your own life and your own situations and think, who have I not seen? Who's important to me that I'm not showing or telling how important they are to me? So our trip continued last Saturday. We left Nashville and my cousins and aunt, and we headed to Nashville. We had a 10-hour trip, and we took our time, and we kept moving, though, and it's 10 hours. You can't change 10 hours. It is what it is. So we arrived in Kansas City at 1 a.m. on Sunday morning and really pretty much hit the sack right away. It was a long day. And we wanted to get up and get some stuff going and get John the beginnings of acclimation to Kansas City. So we got up Sunday and we headed out, had some coffee and breakfast at a cool place, and we went by the hospital, just looked at it from the outside, and it's a nice big structure, sits up on sort of a hill overlooking Kansas City, and impressive. It's a community hospital. So good stuff. But also in Kansas City, one of my ex-boyfriends, Matthew, lives, and he is now married to a nice guy named Darren, who I got the chance to meet this time. Matt and I have stayed in touch, and through my addiction that was present when I was with Matt, addictions, actually, yes, I have two, he was able to forgive me. And I have found that with my exes, they have forgiven me. They realized that the problem was me. It resided in me. It really wasn't about them. I loved each of them when I was with them. There was no doubt about that. I did not behave. My actions didn't necessarily always show that, but I did. My addictions were the problem. So he was able to forgive me, and we were able to, in Kansas City, my husband and I had dinner with Matt and his husband. So we've each found someone with whom we are comfortable and are in the right space to make that commitment. And that's an important thing. So we had a lovely dinner outside and a beautiful evening, springtime in Kansas City. It was wonderful. So the trip on a connection level, or a reconnection level, was very important and very profound for me. And it's something I won't forget. And I won't forget my husband being the impetus behind much of it. Let's talk about Kansas City a little bit. John and I noticed that it's a very clean city because we come from a city that isn't particularly clean. Baltimore's very dirty, and there's a lot of litter. In my first show, I did a whole segment on Baltimore trash because we have a lot of litter, and people just don't seem to care. And that's unfortunate. I don't always understand that. It's, to me, a downer, and it's a sign that we really don't care. And I have to ask why we don't care. What compels someone to just blatantly and overtly litter? I haven't been able... Well, and you can go into reasons why. And like this morning, I was walking the dog in the park, and there's a bench beside a baseball field. And I look over, and there's 2 containers of mostly eaten chicken. The bones are still there. It was just left on this bench. And there's a trash can probably 30 yards away. Not full. I checked. So there it sat. There was a can of Coke as well, an aluminum can. And I pondered, should I pick it up? Should I clean it up? And I thought, no, I'm not going to. I didn't put it there. I'm not going to pick it up. I just think I enable someone to do it again if I or anybody else picks it up. Now, someone will, and I understand that. And please don't take my attitude as belligerence. I just have thought about it. And I don't want to enable. I want to be part of the solution and not the problem. There's that. So Kansas City, very clean, very pretty, very picked up. The state of Missouri estimates that it spends approximately $58 million every year on trash removal from its state roads and highways. Now, even if that figure is inflated to $58 million, let's say it's $30 million even. That's a tremendous amount of money that could be going to other places and other things and other people, other programs. So, John and I said, well, I wonder why Kansas City is neater and less dirty and trash-strewn. Well, in Kansas City, it would appear that community anger turned to awareness, turned to action. And they imposed some serious charges. This from an article in the Kansas City Star, and I checked out the government site on their trash programs. There is an $1,000 per incident fine and up to 1 year in county jail if you are convicted. $1,000 fine every incident and up to a 1 year in the county jail. Now, I'm a big believer now in consequences. I think consequences are very important. If we don't have consequences that hurt, either financially or loss of freedom, things like that, then I don't think it gets into our thick skulls. I really don't. I think we are a species that likes to get away with things. I certainly have done my fair share of that in my life. So, I'm a big believer in consequences now. Now, are consequences applied fairly in this world? Absolutely not. Will they ever be applied fairly? Absolutely not. I think that's part of our flawed human condition. But we can do the best that we can. Again, we can be part of the solution and not the problem. So Kansas City took it upon themselves to impose a hefty fine. Financial bite can get somebody's attention. And up to 1 year in the county jail. They also have a no more trash campaign. And they're just stepping up law enforcement. People have gotten to the point where the anger became awareness, became action. And that's what we have to continue to do because that's what we are able to do. Could I have picked up the trash this morning on the bench? I certainly could have. I chose not to for reasons I explained. From an editorial in the Kansas City Star in October of 2019, there is a huge problem of illegal dumping trash in Kansas City. Old tires and mattresses and everything in between. People just go into a neighborhood and dump it. So, in 2019, 22 cameras were placed at 17 illegal dumping sites. Very cool. Right? Let's see who's doing it. Seems smart to me. And last year, meaning 2018, because this article was in 2019, enforcement officials issued roughly 200 citations for illegal dumping. But given this, the problem still continues unabated in certain parts of the city and the town. People just don't care. And they will find a way to do what it is that they want to do. In my spiel about forgiveness, I could forgive those who do something like that, who dump trash illegally. I could sit in anger, But that's not part of the solution. And I'm making it about me because I'm sitting in anger in me. And that's not productive. It's just not. So I have to really think. I have to really sit here and think what I'm going to do as I move ahead, as I turn 60 in August. What am I going to do to be effective and helpful? Haven't figured it out yet. This podcast is a great opportunity because I can speak about certain things, and it is a life and happiness podcast. It is not my goal to sit here in anger and resentment or fear and propel those things forward. Now, I can admit to them and talk about certain aspects and turn it around into, well, it's all a part of my life, but it's the happiness part that's key. Happiness, as I talked about in the first show, is a choice. And I just have to find what works for me in terms of solutions. Sometimes I can be overly emotional and sit in those emotions. So I want to keep the mixture of emotions, but I also want to strive more for action. I hope you've enjoyed segment 2. Segment 3 is up next. And please hang on to segment 4 when I do You Know Who You Are and Jeff's Daily Happy List. Back in a moment on the GSMC Podcast Network. This is Life and Happiness.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Hello and welcome back to the GSMC Podcast Network. This is the Life and Happiness Podcast. I'm still Jeff Nolt, your host. You know, in this pandemic, there have been some things that have been encouraging. Not a lot, but some. And there are always things that can be encouraging if we seek them out, if we think about it, if we think in a positive way, which I don't always do. But I do a lot more than I used to. And one of the positive things is that the park, I've told you that John and I live on a park in Baltimore. The park's name is Patterson Park. It's named for William Patterson, who was a Baltimore merchant and lived from 1752 to 1835. The park is 137 acres, and it was created in 1827, so 8 years before Mr. Patterson died. It consists of open fields of grass, large trees, paved walkways, historic battle sites, a lake, playgrounds, athletic fields, a swimming pool, an ice skating rink, picnic pavilions, and a dog park. It is the city's largest park and is nicknamed the best backyard in Baltimore. It is, for us, the best front yard in Baltimore. The historic aspect of it, the Battle of Baltimore during the War of 1812, the northwest corner of the park, Hampstead Hill, was the key defensive position for U.S. forces against British ground forces. There is a 60-foot observatory, commonly known as the Patterson Park Pagoda or just Pagoda. It was designed in 1890 and completed in 1892 by Charles Latrobe, who was the general superintendent and engineer under the Park Commission. It was designed as a people's lookout tower with an Asian motif, and it was inspired by Latrobe's fascination with the East, the Far East. The park has been, the pagoda has been designated as Baltimore City Historic Landmark, and it was in 1971 that it was. The park has 4 main entrances at each corner, and the surrounding neighborhoods are Butchers Hill, Canton, Highlandtown, Patterson Park, and Upper Fells Point. It truly is a real gem in this city. And we have been very encouraged by the number of people that now use the park so much more than they did. And in the isolation time and the quarantining, when in the beginning of this COVID sickness, people stayed in, so the park was not busy at all. I would go out and walk the dogs, and it was eerily kind of quiet and silent and an absence of humanity. There were some people, of course, but nothing like what it has become. So people in the negativity have found great positivity. And I find that they're finding great happiness by just being out in the park. We've had some beautiful days, and I've never seen more runners. I've never seen more joggers. I've never seen so many people playing tennis, walking their dogs, playing sports, badminton, having meetings outside, having picnics. Whatever the case is, it's very busy. And so I was just sitting upstairs here kind of contemplating on some things for this show, and I'm watching people play tennis. And sometimes I giggle because they're not too good. So I was watching them and just sort of giggling, but I'm also thinking, is tennis a hobby to them, for them? Are they more trained than the person for whom tennis is a hobby? You know, are these people, some of these people are rather skilled, particularly you can tell when they serve. And does it make a difference with sport versus hobby if someone is more trained and skilled? Does it preclude tennis from being a hobby if you are highly trained? So it got me to thinking, well, let's look at the difference between being a hobbyist and an athlete. Is it important to have a hobby? Do you, listening now, have a hobby or 2 or 3? What is the difference from a job, athletic endeavor, and a sportsman and a hobbyist? I saw this blog spot. It's called the Fab 40 OH. Couldn't agree with him more. The Fab 40 blog spot. Guy in his 40s wants to be a distance runner without injuring himself. And it's the whole athlete versus hobbyist. Is competition the difference between having a hobby and being an athlete? An athlete, in the online dictionary, www.dictionary, says, quote, a person trained or gifted in exercises or contests involving physical agility, stamina, or strength. Now, I would say about that a person can be trained and gifted at the same time. I don't think it's an or thing. And I would also say that an athlete involves physical agility and stamina and strength, not maybe or. The same site, www.dictionary, says of a hobby, quote, an activity or interest pursued for pleasure or relaxation and not as a main occupation. And this runner was saying, does can a competitive nature override the more casual nature of engaging in a hobby? I'd say yes. If it starts to get a little more serious in your mind and you're thinking about performance and improving that time and improving the form and all that sort of thing, then I think it moves from what might be a hobby into being an athletic endeavor or sport. The desire for more from yourself or the performance definitely changes one from a hobbyist to an athlete. If you're setting goals, you're more likely, an athlete, not a hobbyist. If you're training and investing time and more money in it, then you are probably an athlete, although money can be invested in hobbies, no doubt. If we see things in terms of improvement of performance or obstacles or mental focus or goal setting or endurance and physical pain or frustration, pretty much signals that you're heading into being an athlete or more obsessed with it than being a hobbyist. What are some examples of hobbies? Hobbies, remember, fun, relaxation. Well, there are artistic activities, painting, graphic design, to name 2. Community service, volunteer work. People give a lot of time and energy to that sort of thing. It's not a job. Cooking or baking. Beyond subsistence, of course, we have to cook to eat. But do you make it an art? Are you really passionate about ingredients and combinations of ingredients? And outdoor activities, hiking, beach combing, love it. Beach walking, fishing. Hobbies? Sure. Playing an instrument. Now, some people play an instrument as a job. All the orchestras in the country and bands and all kinds of things, there are formidable musicians. But are you just treating it as fun and relaxation? Do you care if your clarinet squeaks? Team or individual sports, softball leagues, soccer leagues in the park. At night, all kinds of people playing in soccer leagues and softball leagues. It's really fun to see the lights on and to hear the voices and hitting the bat, hitting the ball, and it's just really cool. Are you a traveler? Do you not do it as a job, but do you do it because you want to see the world? Do you want to experience different people, different food? Woodworking or other projects, the DIY, do-it-yourself projects. Are you fastidious with it? Is it something that helps you clear your head? Now, sport can do that with the endorphin rush, but a hobby is sort of, it takes you out of where your headspace is. Maybe you have a parent who's ill, or you have fighting with your spouse, or you're worried about a project at work. Does that hobby take you out of that? The sport certainly does. Woodworking, for example. I'm going to go out in the woodshed, honey, and I'm going to work for a couple hours. Writing or blogging. Gaming, until it becomes an addiction, and then that's a whole other matter. But gaming is a great hobby. Art, learning a foreign language. Are you a history buff? Are you a theater buff? There was a question from the website Quora.com, Quora. It's where a question is posed and then people answer that question. So the question posed was, do professional athletes view their sport as a job or a hobby? When I read it, I thought, well, the answer seems very clear in the question. I'll read it again. Do professional athletes view their sport as a job or a hobby? Well, you're paid as a professional athlete. You've got learned and acquired skills, which you can as a hobby, but they're just more highly tuned as an athlete, as a professional. You can claim your profession on a tax return and write off expenses if it's your job. And you can be described as somewhat of an expert in description or personal bios. You could as a hobbyist too, if you know a lot about whatever it is that you're engaged in. But those are just some things that I thought were interesting. And then on a final note, from Indeed.com and their Indeed career guide, a few thoughts on listing hobbies and interests on a resume. Either or both athletic endeavors and participation in sport and hobbies are important things to list on a resume, but use them in each one strategically. Professional experience and skills are more important to prospective employers than listing hobbies and interests. And you want to list hobbies if you have limited work and educational experience, you have limited skills related to the job to which you're applying, your employer values uniqueness and personality among applicants. Maybe the job posting lists responsibilities or duties that align with your hobbies and interests, so you want to include it. Some employers and companies may value employees' hobbies and interests inside of the work culture or outside of the work culture. Or an employer has a work culture where hobbies and interests are less emphasized, so maybe you wouldn't want to put it on then. So do your research, do your homework, and I think it's really important that we have things to do in this world and that keep us relaxed and we can look to the fun side of life. Sometimes in life, we want the pursuit, the competition, the adrenaline rush, the pressure. And these things hopefully make us and keep us happy, and they bring us happiness. Sometimes, though, in life, we want fun. We want relaxation. We want less, not more. We want easy. We want to diddle and daddle. We want to tinker. These things embolden and empower our happiness and our lives. And like athletics and sports, they also define a state of happy living. Really living. Hey, stay tuned to segment 4 after this quick break. Segment 4 has the popular You Know Who You Are and Jeff's Daily Happy List here on the Life and Happiness podcast.
the Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, the show that gives you advice on everything travel. We explore places you've always wanted to go, as well as giving tips for traveling in those places. We'll give you advice on the best sites for travel tips, information, and discounts. Join us as we travel the world, explore cultures, and meet new people. The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Travel Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Podcast Network Life and Happiness Podcast. I'm Jeff Nolt. Segment 4, You Know Who You Are, and Jeff's Daily Happy List in a little bit. Number 1, to those people who have talked about solution-based and people taking action, the people, whoever you are, 1 person, 2 people, 3 people, 10 people, who have put up dog poop bag receptacles in the park, they affix them to either like a lamppost or a tree, and there are these plastic things that you can stuff plastic bags into. And for those of us who may forget a plastic bag or your dog poops unexpectedly, you can go to one of these receptacles and get bags if somebody or some people have put bags into them. So they've stocked them. So not only do they put the bags up to help us, but they also stock them occasionally, repeatedly, often. And it's just a really nice thing. So to those of you who do that, thank you. And you know who you are. Number 2, I simply asked this young woman who was coming toward me in the Harris Teeter, the back area of Harris Teeter. I said, "How are you?" in a pretty jovial tone. And she said, "Tired." And I just thought, oh, bless your heart. That's the answer you come up with? And the way you said it, it was almost like a badge of honor. "I'm so tired." And it wouldn't be noteworthy, and I wouldn't be making a point of it if it didn't happen frequently. I noticed that when I ask the question sometimes, "How are you? How are you? How you doing?" "Tired." And really, if I had allowed it, she could have taken the air out of the room with that answer to me. It's just such a downer. Now, maybe she just simply needs more sleep. And maybe she could think of a better word and maybe she is tired, bless her heart. Maybe she's had a long week. And to me, it would be a little nicer to hear, I'm really whipped. I've worked a lot. Or I've worked a lot. I'm tired. But tired. I just hear it a lot from young people too. And it's too bad. And we often ask, "How are you?" And we get the same, "Fine, good." So maybe tired is a welcome departure from those answers. Maybe we could all just think about how we answer, "How are you?" And to her, and to anybody who says tired as a common response to "How are you?" you know who you are. Number 3, I am working in the produce department at this grocery store. And the other night, very cute, this family, mom, dad, and son, young son, were in the produce department. I think they were looking at salads or something. And this young man, this young boy, maybe 7 or 8, must have said 4 times, "We need eggs. We need eggs. We need eggs. Mom, Dad, we need eggs." And what struck me, and I mentioned it to him and to the mom, the dad had walked past, I said, it's really refreshing to see a youngster so connected to the grocery shopping experience as your son obviously is. And she smiled and said, "Thank you." And he said, "Thank you." And I was just struck at how engaged he was and how he knew, most certainly, that they needed eggs. Now, granted, they're in the produce department, and the mom even said, "Honey, that's over in dairy and the milk section and all that. So we'll get there. We'll get there. But thank you for letting me know." Then it was just very cute. And they walked off. And then to punctuate the moment even more, The little boy reaches up and grabs his mother's hand, and off they walk to another department in the store. So to the little boy, who was so in touch with what they did not have in their refrigerator at home, you know who you are. And to every other little kid, and I've noticed that there are more kids shopping with their parents, either mom, dad, both of the parents, and the kid or kids. Really nice to see. And a funny note too, the other night there was some folks came in, and I think there were two little kids in one of these driving carts. They can sit up front like they're driving the cart. It's got a little steering wheel. And this kid was screaming his or her lungs out. I couldn't even tell what the gender was, and it didn't matter, but just screaming its lungs out. And, at first I thought, oh, goodness, that's a lot. And then I thought, you know what? Kids will be kids. And the grandmother, whoever was with them, I'm guessing they were the grandparents, just let this kid wail away. And it was so funny because I could hear them in different departments as they moved through the store. Oh, they're in the meat section. Oh, they're back in dairy. Oh, they're heading toward checkout because this kid was just screaming his lungs out. Let him be. It's kind of nice. Number 4. This has been something I've been hearing lately. To versus tuh. I've been listening on the radio. I listen to a lot of radio, and I watch some TV and news, and I listen to podcasts, and of course. And I've known, and I was listening, I think, to the State Department spokesperson or Jen Psaki, who was the White House spokesperson, and I believe they said tuh as opposed to to. T-O. It's a preposition. There's also the number 2, T-W-O, and the adverb T-O-O. They're all pronounced the same. To. The hard T, tuh, and oo, not tuh. Tuh. Now, if I say quickly, I'm going to the store, if you break that down, it probably sounds like, and I am saying tuh, I'm going to the store. But if I'm speaking in front of people, or into a microphone, or at any kind of elevated position in this world, I'm not going to say tuh. I'm going to say to. I'm going to take the time to say to. But I've noticed lately, I don't know if it's a laziness or I don't know what it is, but it's been creeping in because I've heard on several occasions tuh. I did a little research. The Oxford English Dictionary says O, also O, 0, in a sequence of numerals, especially when spoken. 0 is a bit longer to pronounce than O. Now I thought maybe that's all this is about, that 0 takes longer to pronounce. Then I also thought 0. I didn't realize until I thought about it that the second syllable is O, 0. So people sometimes will say 410-560-7968, some random phone number. 410-560-7968. It's not a real number. Don't call it, please. Or it probably is, but I don't know whose number it is. I just made it up. But they use 0 and O in the same telephone number. Now, if you go that the second syllable of 0 is O, then I guess it loosely works. So maybe I stand corrected, but I just think a 0 is a 0, and the letter O is O. Now, zip codes like 90210 in Beverly Hills, it was never 90210. It was 90210. For some reason, it's acceptable in a zip code. I don't know. The British occasionally say not instead of O. In Indian English, it's always not or 0, never O, except occasionally with American influence. There we go. The American influence. Let's cut to the chase. And someone contributed to an online question, what is the difference between O and 0? The 0 as a font is narrower, and the letter O is rounder, and one teacher, as a help to students, urges them to remember the difference by saying that the font 0 is skinnier because it has 0 fat. There you have it. To those of you who say tuh instead of to and use 0 and O in phone numbers, you know who you are. Jeff's Daily Happy List. First of all, I love to fly. I love flying. and almost everything about it. I came home from Kansas City the other day. It had been a while since I had flown, and I loved every bit of it. Even sitting in the middle seat with all the masks around me, etc. And I was masked as well. Number 2, Jen, our best friend and keeper of our dogs, when we go out of town like we did, it's just so wonderful to know that the dogs are in great hands. So to Jen, thank you so much. We can live happily knowing that they're in great hands. AA meetings, Tuesday's topic was acceptance. It was very helpful. Number 4 on my happy list, Celine Dion, singing The First Time Ever I Saw Your Face and or The Power of Love. Just exceptional technique, easy to understand, and her vocal control is just amazing. Love watching it. Ramin Karimloo, he's a Broadway musical theater star. Great voice, great technique, and seems like a really nice guy. The automatic unlock sensor in your car. So if my key is in my pocket and I have coffee and something in my hand, I don't have to dig into my pocket to get my key to unlock my door. It just unlocks it. Number 6, coffee. 1 cup each day. Love it. I think that's about it for Jeff's happy list, and you know who you are. Thanks very much. It was great being with you. Until our next show, please keep making great moments. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Life and Happiness Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find the show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitchers, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows. From the GSMC Podcast Network, from sex and relationships to health and wellness, life and happiness, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts Life and Happiness Podcast.